Welcome to another edition of Diplomatic Channel. I'm Amarachi Ubani. This week on the program, we review the major conversations at the UN General Assembly as well as the meetings held on the sidelines. Later on, we'll discuss with Foreign Affairs Analyst Ero Ibafidon, who's been at the UNGA, his thoughts on the conversations. That's Diplomatic Channel in a wrap. We'll be right back after a quick check on other discussions in diplomatic circles.
The UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres has appointed Dr. Adedoyin Adeleke as co-chair of the United Nations Independent Group of Scientists charged with preparing the 2027 Global Sustainable Development Report. The GSDR is the UN's flagship evidence-based publication on the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, mandated by UN member states and released every 4 years. As co-chair, Dr. Adeleke will lead a team of 15 globally renowned scientists from multiple disciplines and regions to deliver cutting-edge insights on emerging challenges and pathways for accelerating the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. The CEO of the Nigerians in Diaspora Commission, Mrs. Abike Dabiri Erewa, has congratulated Captain Kelechi Ndukwe on his promotion to Commander Task Force of the United States Navy, headquartered in Ceuta, Spain. In his new position, Captain Ndukwe will be leading the U.S. Navy destroyer operations in Europe, Africa, and the Mediterranean, showcasing his outstanding service record, professionalism, and leadership in advancing global maritime security and collaboration. And finally, the NIDCOM CEO has also congratulated Commander Matuo Olufokunbi of the U.S. Navy as he made history as the third Nigerian American to assume command of a U.S. Navy warship and the first Nigerian American to qualify as a nuclear engineer under the prestigious United States Navy nuclear propulsion program. She noted that his distinction in one of the most rigorous and elite programs of the U.S. military underscores the quality, discipline, and capability of Nigerians on the global stage.
Welcome back. I think it's safe to say that by now, nearly all the world leaders built to attend the 80th session of the United Nations General Assembly have addressed the Assembly. Some leaders blew hot over the Israeli war in Gaza, demanded a Palestinian state, condemned the United States for its support of Israel and its weaponization of trade, while the African leaders all pushed for Security Council reforms in the form of a permanent seat at the Security Council. A number of notable world leaders were absent. The Nigerian president, for one, Bola Tinubu, who was represented by the vice president, Kashim Shettima, the Egyptian president, Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, who was represented by Foreign Affairs Minister Badr Ahmed Mohamed Abdelati, the president of China, Xi Jinping, who was represented by Premier Li Qiang, the Russian president, Vladimir Putin, who was represented by Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, who was represented by the External Affairs Minister Subrahmanyam Jaishankar, and the Saudi Arabian President Prince Mohammed bin Salman, who was represented by Minister for Foreign Affairs Prince Faisal bin Farhan Al Saud, just to mention a few. But let's hear from these representatives the key moments in their addresses.
My friends,
the conversation at the UN General Assembly seemed already divided, even though the theme for this year was Better Together, 80 years and more for peace, development and human rights. Global addresses centered around recognition of a Palestinian state and failure of the UN to stop rising global conflict, as well as calls for reforms. And for some countries, the presidents were absent. Instead, you had prime ministers and foreign ministers saddled with the task of giving the addresses. Nigeria's Vice President Kashim Shettima proposed key reforms at the UN and a permanent seat at the Security Council for Nigeria. He also declared Nigeria's support for a two-state solution to the war in Gaza.
Our case for permanent seat at the Security Council is a demand for fairness, for representation, and for reform that restores credibility to the very institution upon which the hope of multilateralism. We do not believe that the sanctity of human life should be trapped in the corridors of endless debate. That is why we say, without stuttering and without doubt, that a two-state solution remains the most dignified path to lasting peace for the people of Palestine. The people of Palestine are not collateral damage in a civilization searching for order. They are human beings, equal in worth, entitled to the same freedoms and dignities that the rest of us take for granted.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim.
For Saudi Arabia, Foreign Affairs Minister Prince Faisal bin Farhan Al Saud chided the international community over its failure to take firm actions to end the Israeli aggressions and violations, which it said will only cause further instability and insecurity regionally and globally.
وتدعو جميع الدول إلى الاعتراف بدولة فلسطين واستمرار دعم.
He also affirmed Saudi Arabia's support for diplomatic pathway for addressing the issue of Iran's nuclear program and called for positive engagement in negotiations and cooperation with the International Atomic Energy Agency. His message came hours before 3 European partners to the international deal over Iran's nuclear program announced they were reinstating sanctions 10 years after they were lifted. The UK, France and Germany activated the so-called snapback mechanism, accusing Iran of continued nuclear escalation and lack of cooperation. Iran had suspended inspections of its nuclear facilities, a legal obligation under the terms of the 2015 deal, after Israel and the US bombed several of its nuclear sites and military bases in June. Speaker of the Iranian Parliament, Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, on Sunday pledged reprisal as he condemned to 3 European countries over the sanctions. In his remarks, he said Iran does not consider itself obligated to comply with these illegal resolutions, including the suspension of enrichment. He said Iran believes its right to enrichment is still approved by international law today. Many diplomats got up to leave as the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu got up to give his address. Mr. Netanyahu said Israel was not done with the war in Gaza.
We're not done yet. The final elements, the final remnants of Hamas are holed up in Gaza City. They vow to repeat the atrocities of October 7th again and again and again, no matter how diminished their forces. That is why Israel must finish the job. That is why we want to do so as fast as possible.
He then spoke directly to Israeli hostages held in Gaza after informing that loudspeakers had been set up in the enclave so they could hear his voice.
Our brave heroes. This is Prime Minister Netanyahu speaking to you live from the United Nations. We have not forgotten you, not even for a second. The people of Israel are with you. We will not falter and we will not rest until we bring all of you home. If Hamas agrees to our demands, the war could end right now. Gaza would be demilitarized, Israel would retain overriding security control, and a peaceful civilian authority would be established by Gazans and others committed to peace with Israel.
He issued an ultimatum to Hamas, vowing to hunt down the group if they did not release the hostages.
Giving the Palestinians a state 1 mile from Jerusalem after October 7th is like giving Al-Qaeda a state 1 mile from New York City after September 11th. This is sheer madness. It's insane, and we won't do it.
The Indian Minister for External Affairs, Subramanian Jaishankar, chose to speak against terrorism and how India had no tolerance of it, referring to the deadly militant attack on tourists in Indian-administered Kashmir.
We remain determined to protect our people and secure their interests at home and abroad. That means zero tolerance for terrorism, robust defense of our borders, forging partnerships beyond, and assisting our community abroad.
The Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov purported that NATO's desire to expand threatens not only Russia and China, but other Eurasian states. He said that Europe was not enough for NATO, so it is penetrating the Pacific Ocean, the South China Sea, and the Taiwan Strait, undermining ASEAN's universal mechanisms and creating threats not only to China and Russia, but also to other countries in the region. Regarding the war with Ukraine, he said any instance of open hostility towards Moscow will result in a tough response, and that Russia's security and vital interests must be reliably guaranteed. The Chinese Premier Li Qiang chose to address the return of Cold War mentality as he called for multilateralism and free trade during his address. He called on countries to cooperate more closely and to pursue common interests, promote beneficial economic globalization, and move forward together. He said Beijing remains confident in maintaining positive economic momentum while continuing to support global growth.
As you already know, the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, when he was welcoming leaders to the General Assembly, charged them on the kind of world that they wanted to create. He called on them to meet present challenges of war, poverty and hunger, which are on the rise. He called for unity among members to avert an unimaginable crisis. His convictions were echoed by some leaders, but for others, the UN has deviated from its original course.
The United Nations, the umbrella body for many countries of the world, where alliances are made and villains are warned. 80 years since its establishment, it has come a time for reflection.
What kind of world do we choose to build together?
In his opening remarks to the General Assembly, Secretary General Antonio Guterres said the world itself has changed and entered into an age of reckless disruption.
We have entered in an age of reckless disruption and relentless human suffering. Look around. The principles of the United Nations that you have established are under siege. Listen, the pillars of peace and progress are buckling under the weight of impunity, inequality, and indifference.
The remedy, in his opinion, is for leaders to determine the kind of world they need to make over the next 80 years.
What kind of world will we choose? A world of raw power or a world of laws? A world that is a scramble for self-interest or a world where nations come together? A world where might makes right or a world of rights for all?
But US President Donald Trump questions the effectiveness of the UN, saying it has not come close to living up to its potential.
What is the purpose of the United Nations? The UN has such tremendous potential. I've always said it. It has such tremendous potential, but it's not even coming close to living up to that potential. For the most part, at least for now, all they seem to do is write a really strongly worded letter and then never follow that letter up. It's empty words, and empty words don't solve war.
For other countries, reforms is a must. The current UN does not reflect the present changes nor challenges.
But gender representation is not enough. What we must achieve is actual gender equity because it benefits not only women and girls, but entire societies. True equity requires systemic change, and so women's empowerment must remain at the heart of our global agenda.
African leaders have also increased calls for Security Council reforms, with Africa given a permanent seat at the Security Council.
Nigeria must have a permanent seat at the UN Security Council. This should take place. This should take place as part of a wider process of institutional reform.
Institutions rarely fail because they lack vision or ideals.
More often, they drift into irrelevance when they do not adapt, when they hesitate to act, and when they lose legitimacy.
At the end of this year's General Assembly, individual countries will assess gains by the outcomes of the bilaterals and partnerships fostered, which will guide relations over the next year until 2026, when they gather again for another General Assembly.
We're off on a short break. Still ahead, Foreign Affairs Analyst Ero Ibafidon joins me in reviewing UNGA 80. Stay with us. Joining us now is Foreign Affairs Analyst Ero Ibafidon. He joins us from New York. Ero, thank you so much for joining us on the program today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me today.
And you probably had a front row seat at the United Nations General Assembly this past week. You have watched the U.S. President, Donald Trump, deliver his scathing remarks to the rest of the world, watched the Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, give his address, despite being booed by diplomats who walked out when he took up the podium to speak. You also heard African leaders call for a permanent seat at the Security Council. You also heard Nigeria's Vice President, Kashim Shettima, deliver his remarks. Let's begin with your general overview of this year's UNGA.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. I would say this year's UNGA was a clear show for the world needs reforms on every level. And I say that to say the world leaders were actually clamoring for a reform. They feel like the approach we are using in 1945 should be different from what we are using now in the 20th century. And I would say not only did the Vice President Shettima makes a demand for a permanent seat, other world leaders also underscore that same approach, because they feel there's a need for Africa to be a voice in decision making. This is necessary because the world realized that Africa, we are over 1.4 billion plus people, and we cannot just be seated and the people are making decisions on our behalf. So I think that was the reason why a lot of African leaders come out together to say, no, we need to be in the seat where decision is made, not just people making decisions on our behalf. And for Nigeria, and like the Vice President mentioned in his speech, that Nigerian is the third largest population in the world. So yes, we need a permanent seat in the security level, not just clamor, not just because we need it. The world feel it is necessary for now, because African is the future everybody sees, and there is need for our voices to be heard. Even the the Kenya president also mentioned the need for African to have a permanent seat in decision making and not just living on decisions made by other world leaders. African is coming together. They are reuniting, and their voice is being heard. This is because I think the era for the world to see Africans as a place for humanitarian aid has passed. African is the one actually championing basic reforms and basic peacekeeping, climate actions, and all of those things. It starts from Africa. So African, we are doing a big job. So I think there is need for us our voices to be heard, and for Africans to have a permanent seat at decision making.
But you see, this year's UNGA really wasn't about Africa. I mean, if you'd followed the conversation in the room, it was mainly about the recognition of Palestine as a state, what Israel is doing in Gaza, all of those airstrikes, the ground operations, trying to get people in Gaza to relocate to other areas because they're trying to take over certain parts, of the enclave. And then you also have leaders also taking a swipe at the U.S. itself. We heard the South African president talk about the tariffs, how trade has been weaponized now in the world. Africa really wasn't the focus, of this UNGA. What did you make of the other conversations in the room?
Okay, this year's UNGA was centered on we're better together. Why we say we're better together, Palestinians came in the process. Yeah, there is need for the world to understand that the United Nations is meant to unite the world and not break them. So bringing up Palestine to be part of world leaders at the UNGAs and other global United Nations event, I think it is necessary for now because we are trying to unite the world and not break the world. So, and the world feels like Palestinians need a lending voice at the United Nations, and that is why other world leaders also back the Palestinians joining the United Nations. I think Israel and his ally were strongly against it, and from day one, and they still wish that it never happens and all of that. But the United Nations team for this year is better together. I think the better we come together, the better for the world, rather than fight and or war everywhere. I think we'll be stronger if we come together as a country, as countries, as united. As united we stand and divided we say we fall. So I think the world actually clamor for more peace. People lend their voice that the Palestinians need a seat at the United Nations. And people feel like the war going on in Gaza and all of those places has to stop. Even the U.S. president also mentioned that the war had to stop. They should stop it and all of those. So, yeah, I think it's more centered around peace and why we are stronger together.
Well, the Vice President, Kashim Shettima, did hold some very important meetings on the sidelines of the UNGA. One of the meetings he had was with the Secretary General, Antonio Guterres. One of the things he told him, of course, was for UN support for Nigeria, because he says we have achieved more. You mentioned peacekeeping. Yes, Nigeria has been there. Nigeria is also aspiring to become a permanent member of the UN Security Council. Do you think that this conversation resonated with Mr. Guterres?
I think strongly the conversation really did, because what the vice president did here was quite laudable and is well commended, because he was calling for more of partnership, because it's more like this is Nigerians' right. Nigerians are the center of it. And like he mentioned in his speech, Nigeria is the third largest population in the world. So our voices should not just be, people shouldn't be making decisions for us. We should be at the center of where decisions are being made on the global stage, mostly at the United Nations. So yeah, I think it's more of him calling for partnership. Let's work together to actually achieve more, rather than him actually just meeting. It was more like, let's work together so that we can achieve more together and we can champion a lot more together. That is what I think that meeting was more about, more of let's partner, let's work together.
Do you think that President Tinubu should have attended the UNGA?
If you ask me, I would say yes, it would have made a lot of change. It would have actually helped amplify more of Nigerians' presence, because it was centered around more world leaders. But the vice president also did a very good and fantastic job. He was able to actually champion the voice of the president, even while he wasn't there. So yeah, it would have made a lot of difference. But the vice president also did a very, very fantastic job at the United Nations this year.
With the reforms in the Security Council, your quick observations on, what areas you feel that the UN could look into with these reforms, apart from a permanent seat for Africa. We know that that's an ongoing discussion. We'll probably be discussing this at the next UN when the UN turns 81. But what other areas of reform do you think the UN could look into? I give you an example. The Slovenian president gave, one example. She said there's never been a female UN Secretary General. And it was only recently that a female was appointed as president, of the General Assembly. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah, so, yes, they are very correct. And I think the UN wanted to do something different this year. That was why a female president was appointed as the president for the General Assembly, which is a milestone for the United Nations. 80 years is a big deal. And this is because we are actually trying to center more on gender equalities and give voices to the women. However, the UN, we are looking at a situation by men who can champion more meaningful and expanding on the Security Council at the UN. I think those are the areas that, if you notice, that's the area the world was clamoring for. Then there should be a reform in the climate financing also. That was areas that was also mentioned. Then development fundings and ensuring that Africans has African is not just a place for aid, but they must have a seat in decision making. So I think those are the reforms, basic reforms that the world was clamoring for. They need Africans to have a voice. Their voice should be more influential, as well as not just having a voice. Think about it that African alone controls 1.4 billion people in the world. That is enough for the UN to think that to give an African a permanent seat in major decision departments at the UN.
Errol Ibafedon, thank you so much for joining us on this edition of Diplomatic Channel.
Thank you so much for having me today.
This is where we end the program this week. I'm Amarachi Ubani. Join us again for more conversations next time.